Okay, wonderful. Welcome everyone to our virtual roundtable on community engagement strategies. My name is Eileen Corcoran, and I'm the Director of Service and Outreach at the Vermont Historical Society. And this is our third roundtable of 2023 and our last one scheduled right now for the spring. So it's wonderful to see some new faces and some returning faces from our other roundtables. We're looking forward to having a wonderful discussion today on community engagement strategies. And I'm happy to welcome Chris Dissinger from the Fleming Museum at the University of Vermont as my guest. He'll talk a little bit about some of the programs at the Fleming, but then obviously again, it's a roundtable, so we're happy to have some freewheeling discussion. Please ask questions, comment in the chat, tell us what you do and or ask questions of others, and hopefully we can learn together. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Chris to sort of give an intro to what he does and the Fleming does for community engagement. Chris.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here. My name is Chris Dissinger. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Fleming Museum, and I'm largely in charge of outreach and engagement activities. Everything from our marketing, branding, communications plan to guest services and education. So I was going to talk a little bit about some of the recent community engagement strategies that the Fleming has done in the last 2 years, really since COVID. And there are 3 projects in particular that I thought I would kind of focus in on and share. At the Fleming, our community outreach is largely divided between on-campus and off-campus outreach, and each of those is further divided between what I would describe as general and targeted outreach. For general outreach, we rely on largely traditional methods, emails to our listserv, social media, digital, print, and broadcast media, and we still even do a printed newsletter here at the Fleming for each semester. So print is still alive a little bit. For targeted outreach, what we do is we brainstorm audiences that we feel our exhibitions or installations are particularly relevant to. And then we strategize the best way to reach that community. Oftentimes it's by forging relationships with organizations that already have connections to the audiences that we think would find the exhibitions or the installations particularly relevant. It is, I would say, important to note here that as a museum, we don't want to invite them in and ask them, how do we connect to your audience? We don't want to, that's not what we're interested in, but rather in what ways can the museum better support you and serve your audience? And that's an important distinction to make. And I'll give an example. In the spring of last year, we mounted an exhibition of works by a Syrian-born artist named Mohammed Hafez. And he created these highly detailed dioramas in discarded suitcases that were inspired by the stories that refugees to America had shared with him. Himself a refugee, Hafez was careful to share these stories using their own words, their own story, through taped interviews that could be listened to while viewing these very intricate dioramas. Now, we knew that this exhibition might be of interest to the growing regional refugee community here in Chittenden County, so we wanted to be sure we could offer tours of the exhibition guided by translators. And so to facilitate that, we reached out to an organization who had experience in that, and that was the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity here in Burlington, or CVOEO, to see how we could support this community in general, and if there were concerns that this installation might be triggering for some folks, or might be a difficult installation that needed particular interpretive opportunities. So CVOEO in turn showed the opportunity in their network, and we coordinated having translators and guides that could help interpret the exhibition to those who were interested in viewing it. And then during this collaboration, we asked CVOEO if there were other ways to help support these communities. And they mentioned that they were looking for a venue. CVOEO was looking for a venue for their largest fundraiser of the year, which had been on hiatus since COVID had visited. And that was a multicultural fashion show that was called Caribou. To be honest, we couldn't think of a more splendid venue for a fashion show than the museum's Marble Court. And so we partnered with them in the fall of 2022 to host the fashion show. And this required the museum kind of serving as a mediator between the university and CVOEO, because the university had many policies, restrictions, guidelines in terms of how the spaces can be used and who can use them, and who can serve food. We had food involved, we had drinks involved, we had the fashion show, we had, it was a multi-faceted event. And so we donated our space, our time, and our resources to the event, which was tremendously successful for them. And in fact, it looks like we're going to be the new home of the event moving forward, at least for the next couple of years. What this collaboration has allowed us is to support this local resource provided the museum while gaining exposure to new audiences. So for many of the people who came to the fashion show, the Caribou fashion show this past fall, it was their first time in the museum. They had never been in the museum. They never experienced the museum. It was an opportunity to invite them into the museum. And then also an opportunity for us to get feedback and understand what it might be that helps the museum, the Fleming Museum, be a more welcoming space to everyone in the community. So that was a great opportunity that we had, and we realized that through that opportunity that this was an approach that seemed to work well for us, and something that we think about now when anytime we're discussing a possible exhibition. Who are the audiences, not only in general who will be interested in it, but who are the audience that we can target to help bring in new audiences and make the museum a more welcoming space for everyone. The second example of targeted outreach involves a unique collaboration that we had with the Howard Center Arts Collective, who helps support artists in the community with addiction and/or mental health challenges. The Howard Center was looking both for a venue and sort of a source of inspiration for their artists. At the time, our collections manager, Margaret Tamulonis, who I think is on this call, I see her name in there. So Margaret had a relationship with the organization and suggested the idea of using the Fleming's large permanent collection as a source of inspiration. And so what we did was then encourage their artist to visit our online database, museum collections database, and peruse it, looking for art that might inspire them, speak to them, that they might want to react to. And in doing so, we realized the next step that would be really fun is then to invite the artist into the museum, into a new space that we have called the Learning Studio, which is a hybrid interactive type space where we bring art out of the permanent collection into this room for a more intimate experience with those objects. And so we invited the artist into the Learning Studio to actually see up close and get intimate with the objects that they selected for the exhibition that they would like to respond to. And so that was a really great opportunity to bring these artists into the museum. And then the next step was that they would go and create their own interpretations, their own artwork inspired by our artwork, and we would mount an exhibition on it. And so the exhibition opened in the fall of 2023. And, it's interesting because I would say that exhibition that we put in a space called a new space in the museum that we call the Storytelling Salon, which came out of a process of what we call the Fleming Reimagined, where we're sort of reimagining our place as a museum in our community. And the Storytelling Salon is kind of an interactive space in the museum where we encourage dialogue about the art that's on the walls. And what happened was that this particular exhibition in the Storytelling Salon was actually more popular than a Rockwell Kent print exhibition that was across the way. That was this huge exhibition that we really thought was going to be kind of like the keynote exhibition. But this little exhibition was actually more popular, and it really spoke to people in ways that was very touching. To help spread the word about this collaboration and to detail its development, we partnered with a local media nonprofit in Burlington called the Media Factory. And they produced a short video. It's available on our website if you'd like to see it. And the video shared the intimate stories of these artists and the process behind the partnership. And so it was an important aspect of the exhibition, not just to share the artwork, but also to tell the stories, the compelling stories behind the artwork and behind the process of the artwork. We had several events for that community, including a special opening reception that celebrated the artist and was just a wonderful event. Once again, it was attended by many, many people who had never been in the museum before. It was their first time in the museum. And in many ways, they felt uncomfortable to come to the museum before. And so this was an opportunity to create a relevant exhibition that they felt welcomed and they saw themselves reflected in. And so it was really a wonderful, wonderful exhibition. And then the third project that I'd like to share is a little different. It has to do with community outreach in terms of how we structure our programs that are typical to museums in dealing with community outreach. And those are the two programs that many museums will have. One is membership program, and the second is an annual appeal program. Now, it's been interesting because at the museum, at the Fleming Museum, these two programs have gotten somewhat confused by our audience. So what happens is oftentimes people will give to the annual appeal and assume that that covers a membership. Or people would give a membership, would be a membership, and they'd be wondering why they're receiving another annual appeal asking for additional support. And so we stepped back a little bit during the pandemic and really tried to focus on what these two programs were responsible for in the context of our engagement with the community. And what we landed on was that the membership program was really about outreach and engagement. It was really about connecting with our audience. It was really about making connections and communicating what was happening in the museum and inviting them to participate, inviting them to come in and experience the events, the exhibitions, the educational programming that we have. So it was really an outreach mechanism. That was the most important thing for us about the membership program. It wasn't about the revenue it brought in. And interesting enough, only about 20% crossover between the membership program and the annual appeal, meaning only about 20% of the people were both members and annual appeal givers. So there was actually a relatively small risk for us to change this up a little bit to see what it could be. And we changed it rather dramatically. because what we did is we took the membership program and made it entirely free. And the membership program, which we now call the Fleming Community Circle, and in a playful way, we call our members flamingos. And the Flamingos program is an opt-in free program. So all you need to do to be a member of the Fleming Museum is provide your email and address. And once we have that information, we'll connect with you and stay in communication with you and share the upcoming exhibitions. You'll receive our newsletter. You'll receive our emails. You'll be in communication to the extent that you want to be. Of course, with our emails, you always have the opportunity to kind of opt out. But yeah, so it was really a mechanism to communicate with our audience. And so what we have now as a result of this, 2 years after we made the change, we have about a threefold growth in membership. So that's just the people that we can outreach to. Now, by collecting the addresses, we also have a larger address book, basically, to send our annual appeal to let people know that we are the projects that we have going on, the opportunities that they have to support us. And we do 2 annual appeals a year. We do one in the fall, which is a general annual appeal that is generally just for supporting the museum and its wide programs. And then we do one in the spring that's project specific. So we'll do one that maybe focuses on education, or focuses on collections care, or focuses on acquisitions or something of that nature. The first year that we did this, of course, it was the first year right out of COVID, and our combined income between what was membership and what is annual appeal was down about 15%. But this year it looks like we're going to be well ahead. And when I say well ahead, I mean ahead of generally where we were in the past 5 years prior to COVID. So those are 3 sort of different programs that we have done in community engagement, both to reach out to targeted audiences, and then also to sort of increase our engagement opportunity with our core audiences. So I'm happy to take any questions about those or hear any other ideas about community engagement, and answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I think lots of great stuff in there. So again, feel free if you want to unmute yourself, ask a question, make a comment, share, or you can use the chat or use the raise hand function.
That was good.
Surprised they actually could unmute themselves, because I would think they would use the comment.
Oh, sorry, I'm letting somebody else in. Sorry, was that a comment from someone I didn't quite hear? Oh, Peter's got his hand up. Peter.
Yeah, in the first one and some of the others, you talked about people who had never been there before to your museum. These people knew about your museum. They had driven by it. They're aware of it, but they just never stopped there for any reason. Do you have any sense of that?
It's a good question. I actually don't know the extent of their awareness of the museum, but just know, and it was more anecdotal, to be honest, evidence, but it was in discussion with the people that had come in, just hearing from a lot of people that, this is our first time in the museum. We also heard from quite a few people that they didn't even know the museum existed. And there was also this sense that the museum was exclusively for the campus community. Like it was a campus resource that the public was not necessarily invited to. But with that first group, that was related to CVOEO. There was also, we had communications afterwards. We had some feedback opportunities afterwards. And one of the things that we learned was that a lot of these individuals who had never been to the museum before didn't feel like the museum was particularly welcoming to them. They
It's all
didn't
right.
feel like
I'll just move over a little bit out of the glare.
that they were reflected in the museum to the extent that, you know, a sort of hetero-masculine sort of audience would be reflected. So it was an opportunity for us to also sort of take note as we work on the process that I described just briefly, called the Fleming Reimagined, where we're sort of reimagining our colonialist past and how we can improve being a more welcoming museum, a more welcoming space. It was an opportunity for us to think about those things and take note of that, so that as we make decisions about future exhibitions and events and programs, that they're informed by this this feedback.
Can I ask another one? And I don't want to step on anybody's toes. What about school visits? Oh, sorry.
Okay, school visits, that's a great question. So, you know, what happened to the Fleming is very similar to what happened to many, many museums, both regionally and throughout the nation during COVID, is that our school visits disappeared. And the way that the pandemic played out enabled us to open in a sort of piecemeal fashion, in that we opened initially for the campus community, and then we opened a little bit, you know, with limited hours to the regular community, and then we opened, you know, just like we had always opened in the past. And what that sort of staggered approach allowed us to do was redefine sort of our relationship with the campus community, because they were the only people who were able to come into the museum at the time. And so by focusing really on that campus community and seeing what we could be for them, what ways we could support them, and basically what happened was our educational approach, which had always been divided between K through 12, university community, and public programs, was now almost exclusively dedicated to campus university programming. And so we created a lot of connections on the university side. And what we're learning now is that after COVID abated somewhat, that schools are very slowly coming back to the fold. There are some funding issues in terms of availability to travel to the museum and things like that. And so one of the things that we're looking at right now is, do we define that audience, that youth audience, as K through 12 and related to schools only, or do we define that youth audience as a youth audience, and that there are other ways of outreaching to that audience, including through families and through different organizations as well, so that it's not just exclusively our relationship with the K through 12 community, which seems to not have rebounded quite as quickly from the COVID interruption as some other entities have. And so one of the things that we're doing is also looking at creating a lot, as a result of that, one of the things we're looking at doing is creating a lot of self-guided sort of opportunities, so that families can come in and have a scavenger hunt sort of experience. We have these little booklets that they can go through and have these scavenger hunts with the kids. That's we call it the highly subjective scavenger hunt. And it's just an opportunity to be very playful with the collection in a way that is not very typical. It's not a very didactic experience. It's something that's much more playful and fun. But we have not, to answer your question, we have not seen the K through 12 audience return to us at the same frequency as we've had before COVID. So we're working with the schools. We have a visitor request form online, and as they request to come in, we had some classes in here today, some classes on a self-guided trip to the museum. But we're trying to coordinate a more experience that is more catered to them, and also has opportunities to use resources that we can develop that are more evergreen, that last longer, that are not just specific to one thing, but can be used by not only a K through 12 group visiting, but maybe a family of 4, a family of 6 visiting, and things like that.
Great. Thanks, Chris. We've got a couple hands up. So I think Cheryl, you were first.
Thank you. And thank you for this information. I apologize. I'm not, my camera is not cooperating today, but I am curious about the membership and appeal model. I know, Chris, you don't have quite enough data yet, like enough years in a row to really get a sense of trends and compare data points. But I am curious to know if you see, or how much overlap you see between those who donate for the general annual appeal in the fall and those who donate for project specific. Do those tend to be different groups, different audiences, or is there a significant amount of overlap there? Are you able to get these folks twice?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is significant overlap in that appeal. So the people that are giving in the fall also tend to give in the spring to a smaller amount. The spring appeal is generally 30 to 40% of what the fall appeal is. So it's a much smaller appeal for us, but I don't have the hard data in terms of what that crossover is, but I could say anecdotally that it's more than half, more than 50% give to both. But it's a good question, and it's something that we need to track and look into more closely.
Thank you. That's a really interesting model. I'd be interested in seeing how that plays out for you folks.
Yeah, it's been fun. You know, one of the things that we do is we train our front desk staff to let them know about it. And here you can kind of see those are our flamingos, and then people can fill out the form, and then we capture that information and we let them know that we're going to be communicating with them, and they get an opt-in with email. They get an email that says, you know, welcome to the Fleming Community Circle. If you'd rather not get these emails, you can opt out right now. And then from that, we also let them know that you were receiving mailings from the museum, both our newsletter and annual appeal. And just keep them up to date. And very few people have opted out. Most of them, because they're actually providing the information to us, have been staying on.
Great. Dennis.
And I will piggyback onto Cheryl's question. I'm on the board of the Vermont Marble Museum, and we're trying to reboot ourselves after being closed for the past 3 years. And so we're having a lot of discussions about ways to move forward, and really we're looking at it as really beginning a new museum in a lot of ways. So I'm particularly interested in, again, this discussion of membership, how you think of membership. So I want to make sure I'm clear. So you used to have paid memberships before this, right? And then I'm curious about this sort of conversation in-house about moving to this very different model, and how that went. I mean, it makes perfect sense. And again, I think for us, it makes great because we're really trying to build a constituency. So being able to really do that without your audience feeling like you're interested in their money and nothing else. I mean, it seems kind of simple, but kind of brilliant, you know? So
Yeah.
I'm just sort of curious to get a little sort of dive a little bit deeper into how that came about.
Okay, so it actually came about through discussions that we had once again about the Fleming Reimagined. And those discussions, one of the first things that we did in those discussions was try to identify barriers to people coming into the museum. And we always had a modest entrance fee. And it was one of those fees that was so modest that it didn't really contribute a whole lot to the bottom line. But at the same time, it served a little bit as a barrier to certain families and certain audiences to be able to access the museum. And so the first question we asked during this was, what if we didn't have an entrance fee? What does that look like? And we realized what that amount of money that we would lose annually would be by not having an entrance fee. And then we went out to a number of different organizations that had supported us in the past. And we had one organization in particular whose mission was largely aligned with providing access to cultural institutions. And so we looked at that and we said, can we get a gift that's substantial enough to eliminate our entrance fee for like maybe 5 or 6 years, enough time for us to sort of mitigate what that looks like and create new revenue streams that would replace that. And so we went ahead and were able to secure that and did that. So the first step we did was eliminate our entrance fee. And when I say it was modest, it was $5 for an adult. So, it didn't bring in a whole lot of money for the museum, but it was an important, I think, gesture in the community to say, we're now a free museum. And it's something that we're pretty proud of, to be able to say the mission is free. And then we looked at the membership program. It was kind of the next logical step. And the membership program is built like many museums membership programs in a hierarchical structure, meaning if you have more money, you can get more benefit, and it was one of those things that we wanted to kind of deconstruct a little bit. And so the first thought was, why don't we have just a flat membership thing? Like maybe it's $30 and everybody comes in at that same level and it's equalized. But then we kind of started discussing what was the purpose of membership and what was the purpose of annual appeal. And our discussions, we really realized that there was a huge amount of confusion between the two. And our business manager at the time was telling us that so many people who become members are confused that they get this annual appeal letter. And then likewise, we'll have people who give generously to the annual appeal come to the front desk and they'll be asked, are you a member? And they will assume that they are because they have given generously to the appeal, but they actually didn't join the membership. So there was that confusion about it. And so we thought, well, let's look at it a little deeper and see what that crossover is. How many people are members and give to the annual appeal? What is the risk that we have if we change our membership program to be a free program? And it was relatively small, like I said, about 20%. And we felt like we could manage that. We could grow that by basically through the equation that we would gain more members and more addresses that we could mail to let them know about the appeal. That could help us float that a little bit higher, knowing that it would probably take us a few years to get there, but that we could get there. And it looks like it's taken us 2 years and we're right there at its door.
Excellent. So you could say, okay, what do we have in common with the National Gallery of Art in Washington?
Yeah.
You can walk in both doors free of charge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great. It's great.
Other questions or comments? I think one of the things I liked, Chris, about what you talked about when you're talking about, I think the sort of second piece is that sources of inspiration. And I think that's really an intriguing point for what how can we be, or what can we be in our communities? And I think that's an interesting thing of being both a space for things and then a source of inspiration from the collections. And I don't know if anybody else, I know Sarah's here, and Norwich has been doing some great stuff with that, but anybody else kind of have programs or things they've done that you feel sort of allows your organization to be that kind of source of inspiration for others?
I can talk about a couple of the community collaborations that would be
Great.
helpful. In Norwich, this past year, we had a big project that focused around a Bible in our collection. And while the exhibit was not on the history of religion, we did engage all the churches in the community in a variety of different ways, from some art projects to some interdenominational coffee hours at the Historical Society. And that brought in all sorts of people who had never been in before. And, one of our sort of missions is to help community members get to know each other better, deepen their connections. And by holding an interdenominational coffee hour at the Historical Society with one of the ministers leading some question prompts, it really allowed for our goal to be met and for others to get to know us. So that was a nice match for our project.
One of the things I'd be happy to share too is this sort of idea of leveraging audiences a little bit, leveraging what the benefit from one audience to another. And what I mean by that is that we know here at the campus of the University of Vermont that we have an audience that's actually sort of built into our mission, right? It's the student, faculty, staff audience that's right here on campus. And so what we've done is we have created a space in the museum that we call the Learning Studio. And this space is now, it used to be a gallery and now is a hybrid space, a multi-use space. And what we do is when a professor might say, for example, a photography professor might say, we'd like to see some black and white photography from this period in time. And they'll work with Margaret, our collections manager, and Kristen Hansen, our curator, to select those objects. And then we'll bring them into the Learning Studio and have them on view where they can have an intimate experience. But the next step that we like to do when we are able to do it and have the staffing to accommodate it is open those doors to the public, so that the public can also come into that Learning Studio and surprise, here are some wonderful prints that aren't on view that you have an opportunity to get right up close to, have a magnifying glass, really take a look and enjoy under supervision. That is a unique opportunity. And so that opportunity to sort of leverage what we're doing on campus and then inviting the community to experience it has been really a successful sort of model for us. And so in some ways, we're thinking about things like we've always had one foot on campus, one foot in the community, and it's difficult to meet both of those audiences mutually. And one of the things we're thinking about a little bit more now is if we can be the best campus museum possible, meaning we can support the university's mission as best as we can, and then invite the public in to experience these collaborations we're having with the on-campus community, it actually kind of benefits both in a way that we haven't been able to do before. So it's one of those things that we're looking at as well, is kind of leveraging those audiences to create a better experience overall for everyone.
Peter.
Yes, thank you. Chris, like you, I'm on the board of the Vermont Granite Museum, and like you, we have two constituencies, both related to the industry and the general public, some from out of town, some from Vermont. I wonder, is there any connection with the use of the space, whether it's free for money or any connection between a debate about charging and your abandonment of the entrance fee in favor of a membership? We've thought about membership as, if you will, a part and parcel of access to the space, whether you're in the industry or want to have a wedding or something that's not necessarily related. And I'm just wondering whether it crossed your mind to connect, if you will, the periodic use for private audiences, if you will, with the idea of membership.
That's a great question. And that actually is something that we debate internally quite a bit. In terms of the use of our space, and you know, for those who have been to the Fleming Museum, you'll know that we've got this marvelous marble court that's a really unique space in the state of Vermont. It's just a splendid space. That what it is, it can be used by different audiences on campus right now with our approval. So it's a unique space on campus in terms of events and conferences being able to say, you can rent out this marble court like you could rent out another space on campus. We are able to dictate whether or not we will allow that, just because of the safety of the artwork, because we can say, oh, you know, you're looking for a red wine event and we've got white marble, it's not going to happen. But, you know, at times we recently had a board of trustees event here, and we do charge for that. So we charge for the use of our space. But we haven't had, the museum has this interesting long history of uncertainty about whether or not we're going to use our space for community access or not. And up until this point, we haven't done that. Like, we haven't had weddings and things like that. And partly it's because of our facility. You know, we don't have a kitchen and a sink that, you know, caterers can use for different things, you know, so we're limited a little bit in terms of the usage of that. But we're also, you know, it's one of those things that you debate, because you were like, are we really going to come out ahead as a result of this? Because we have to have staff to protect the objects. We have to have staff to help coordinate, and we have to have resources dedicated to protecting the museum. So it's something that it's interesting that you bring up, because we do debate that back and forth a good bit as to whether or not that's a revenue stream that's attractive to us. And that's a revenue stream that that makes sense for the museum or not.
Dennis again.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Hi. I was trying to get a sense again of the finance, and it's interesting to hear Peter talking, because actually Scott has been one of our advisors as we try to get going again. So we're trying to, you know, sort of look at them as at the Granite Museum as a model in a way. Do you get, Chris, is there a significant amount of your funding that the university provides? I mean, what's the sort of relationship between your institution and what's, you know, sort of the overarching parent institution?
Yes. So at the Fleming Museum, our salaries, our staff salaries, and there are 8 of us when we're fully staffed, are covered by the university. We're employees of the university. Everything else, exhibitions, installations, programming, events, all this. It started, my phone's ringing.
Okay.
All of those things are, they are covered by us. So we have to fundraise for those things. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is we have a mix of revenue streams. Some are restricted, meaning we can only use these monies that come in for exhibitions or education or things like that. We do have some streams that are endowments, so they're regenerative. We get money from those streams every year, and those are usually dedicated towards exhibitions. And then we have our, what we would call sort of our gift account, which is our largest stream, which comes from the annual appeal. And it is included also of gifts to the museum. So on occasion, we'll have a very generous gift come into the museum, and that will go in there if there's no restrictions aligned with it. So what does that mean? I would say about 50-50. So when you look at our entire budget, about 50% of it is payroll, and that's covered by the university. About 50% of it's operations, and that's our responsibility.
Got it. I would probably know a lot of the stuff if I lived up there. I'm actually I'm based just outside Philadelphia, but so do you guys teach as well? Do you have do you have that kind of relationship with the university as well? Is there a museum studies program, or what's that?
So what we're doing is, you know, it's interesting. We're evolving that a little bit, trying to figure out what the sweet spot is for us there. Because what we realize is that like in the past, we've had a curator of education, and that curator was a teaching position, right? And they had to have sort of encyclopedic knowledge of the collection. And what we're realizing now is that the knowledge, the expertise that exists on campus is with the faculty. The faculty really know more about, like, you know, a professor of photography knows more about the photography that's in the museum than, say, an educator has an encyclopedic knowledge, a little bit of everything.
Right.
So we're actually moving into a model that really supports having the faculty being the expert and us being the facilitator on being able to facilitate the experience for the group that's coming in, you know, being able to pull those objects, but not for us to be necessarily the experts interpreting what they're experiencing.
Gotcha.
And we also, you know, one of the things that I'll say too is, you know, there's a difference between having sort of like this didactic experience where you're describing what somebody is experiencing. So for example, we have Joseph Albers in our East Gallery right now, which is just wonderful. And you can spend a lot of time in there explaining exactly what Joseph Albers is trying to do. Or you can have opportunities to ask people, what do you think Joseph Albers is trying to do? What is your response to this? And, you know, Albers himself is really about opening eyes, you know, opening new eyes to seeing this artwork in new ways and seeing how it can deceive, color can deceive, and things like this. And so, you know, I think there's a model of engagement that is a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a little less one way. It has a two-way opportunity to it, and having dialogue and discussion, which I think is a lot more fun for both the staff like myself and for the visitor too.
Yeah, moving away from a model where you're droning at somebody I think is always a good thing. So,
Yeah.
Or you feel like you're droning, because you have to feel that way at some point, you know.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Judy.
Yes, I think this interesting topic about free membership is something that we need to look into. One of our members has started a Facebook page, and he puts on periodically, in fact, very regularly, an article about something historic in the town of Hartford. And then he has people join his Facebook page, and he's got hundreds and hundreds of responses. And every time he comes in, he'll say, I've had this many more. And I'm thinking, right now, we say the advantage of being a member is they get the newsletter, basically. I mean, we're in touch with everybody, but I'm just thinking that maybe all these people that are responding to this Facebook page and wanting to know more about Hartford, if we just had an annual appeal, I'm sure we get much, much more income than we do for just our regular membership. So I really, we're going to talk about that. And thank you, Chris, for mentioning that, because I think that's a great opportunity. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say, you know, one of the things that's wonderful about that model is that, you know, anytime as an institution, you're able to create an atmosphere, a culture of relevance to your audience, that there becomes an opportunity of people wanting to be part of that. They want to be part of that they feel relevant to. And that grows with these programs, these posts that are made, these exhibitions that we have. And people really do respond. Like, we're seeing people respond to our annual appeal in a way that is just surprising us.
Sarah.
I confess that the idea of making our membership free petrifies me. Because maybe half our income comes from membership and half comes from our annual appeal. And there is a lot of overlap. And I don't know. And I think for us to do a spring annual appeal targeted to a specific topic, I don't know if that I don't think that would work the way our budget is set up. So I've thought a lot about it too, because people do get confused, but I also am really scared of losing that income.
Yeah, and I would respond to that by saying that, you know, what does work actually for us is not necessarily uniform for everybody. I mean, if you have like a large percentage of your membership also giving to the annual appeal, the risk is much higher.
Barbara.
This is in the weeds. Chris, when you eliminated the financial aspect of your membership, I don't know if you can address this or your accountant or whomever, but there is a part of filing the federal tax forms for nonprofits, especially those that are in our 501c3 range, about your membership and how you fill out that one blank line that has driven us crazy, because we have merged pretty much our membership with just an appeal to the membership and a few outside. We don't have a formal annual appeal. It just coincides with our membership letter. And I personally, because I'm a nerd, have always been timid about letting go of a format where we can say a certain percentage of our income is coming from membership just to fill out that 990. And I just wondered how that might have been addressed in your conversation.
I'm going to profess my ignorance a little bit here on that. It's a result of us being part of the university.
Okay.
So as part of the university, we actually, they're doing all that filing for us. And so we're just sort of like this. And so there's a benefit, I think, to us in being part of the university, in that we're a little bit more malleable to do these things. You know, we can test these things out without those ramifications having to think about sometimes. So, you know, once again, I would stress that what works for us is unique to us, perhaps, and what works for you may incorporate some of these things, but is perhaps much different.
Maybe I shouldn't worry so much.
Sarah.
I would worry. For us, it would mean a real big bylaws change. And we are at, fundamentally a membership organization, and our members have certain responsibilities and roles. And so, yeah, they can be all free, but we still have members. And so that there's just it goes more deeply than a surface level, looking at just whether you charge or not, or where the money's coming from.
Yeah. So I know Chris has another meeting at 1. So I do want to say any last minute questions for him, definitely before he goes, or thoughts that you want to share. All right.
Now, I will say that yeah, on our website, my contact information's there. So if you want to talk about this anymore, I'm a geek about this kind of stuff. So I love talking about it. And a lot of times, it's in these discussions that we realize like, oh, there's the solution. And it was never present, to me before, but it came out of having these dialogues. So I love having conversations with my colleagues. So feel free to reach out anytime.
Great.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And again, I think I love, again, all the different points thinking about, and I think, again, how to take the kernel of the idea that you've given us and work it through the differences that we might have in our organizations and come out with something that maybe works well for us. I think it's a wonderful thing about sharing all of these thoughts with us. So any last minute thoughts, questions before we go? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Again, this will be recorded and I will be sending out the link to everybody. So feel free to share this with someone else who didn't get a chance to be here today. And again, last virtual roundtable of the spring, but we will have coming up our League of Local Historical Societies conference on May 19th. So look for details on that coming soon. Thanks again and have a great day.